in 2007, which is an election year, by an average of 12% annually. So just to remind them of that. Clearly, Deputy Adams, there are cases that come to my own attention here where the discretionary element that always applied in the case of medical cards is now being reviewed by the panel of doctors who look at that. In regard to the pupil-teacher ratio that you mentioned, this applies where for a percentage increase in respect of fee-paying schools. It doesn't apply in the case of other schools, and it will not lead to the loss of hundreds of jobs. I might say to you, Deputy Adams, that the education area is going through a period of pretty significant change, and the use of technology is something that should be encouraged far more. For instance, Minister Rabbit, with his department, have now connected a further 286 secondary schools to 100 megabyte speeds for internet connection, and a further 200 were approved yesterday. But I noticed in a number of schools, Deputy Adams, that where the numbers of pupils are not large enough, and therefore they don't have the range of teachers because of the PTR that applies, it's now evident that many schools where some students wish to do, for instance, honours mathematics, do so by remote connection to schools where teachers do this online. And it allows, for instance, a small number of pupils in a particular school who might wish to do honours mathematics because of the extra points or because they have a flair for it, but because of the numbers of pupils in the school, they don't have a teacher to bring honours mathematics to Leaving Cert. The use of technology is something that is growing in interest and importance, and I see that as being both cost-saving and very effective in the interest of individual or small groups of students in schools where they don't actually have specialist teachers to do that. So your assertion that the increase of PTR for fee-paying schools will lose hundreds of jobs is not accurate.
I might remind deputies that the standing order allows for a brief question on a matter of topical issue. One matter.
Okay, well, I'll make as brief a comment as I can, Collier.
Not on the all 3 or 4 subjects, please.
Okay. I asked one question. I was giving a commentary on what was wrong, and I think people who listened to what the Taoiseach has said, who happen to be in hospital, will get no comfort from his assertion that this extra charge doesn't apply just to one particular illness or disease. But going to the question of the post-leaving cert, and I didn't raise the question about fee-paying schools, I raised it about colleges of further education. And this post-leaving cert course and the courses involved are a liberation for many, many young people who may not have made it the first time round, or who may not have made their minds up, or who may have been in some other difficulties at the time, and they want to get back into further education. So, with respect, Taoiseach, you're wrong in terms of the answer that you gave me. The Teachers Union of Ireland has said that the increase in pupil-teacher ratio will result in the loss of 200 whole-time equivalent posts. Now, this could mean up to 400 part-time posts. And I think this cut is penny wise and pound foolish. I don't think it's good economics, leaving aside the philosophy, which underpins it. You save €4 million, but the social consequences are immeasurable. You're actually robbing many citizens of the opportunity for further education. And if you contrast that by what you say on the issue, you talk about retraining people, you talk about opening up education for people. PLCs, for many, is the first step into a successful career. So I asked the question very specifically, was there an equality assessment carried out? You didn't answer that question.
Thank you. Taoiseach.
Sorry, Deputy Adams.
I asked, was there an equality assessment carried out on this measure?
I don't have the detail of everything associated with this. Let me say, first of all, you referred to the issue of patients being treated. There were 67,206 discretionary medical cards issued for people who have particular hardship or particular nature of an illness being treated. There were actually 450 new primary teacher positions approved and 450 post-primary teacher positions approved. Just earlier today, Minister Quinn and Minister Cannon announced the placing of 6,000 extra post-primary places for persons who are long-term unemployed, with a view to moving them and giving them the opportunity to get back into the world of work, where the vast majority of them want to be. So that's 6,000 extra places, Deputy Adams, which I'm sure will be of interest to colleges of further education all over the country.
Thank you. Deputy Shane Ross.
Thank you, Councillor. I note the figures that you gave to, or the comments you gave to Deputy Adams on growth. And I'd like to ask about the growth figures which you quoted, because the IMF yesterday had some fairly telling things to say about the Irish economy, and particularly because of the growth figures which are emerging. And indeed, their forecast and those from the Department of Finance are very different. The IMF is saying it'll be 1.1% next year. The Department of Finance is saying it'll be 1.5% next year. And what we're getting here is a marked difference, which I think underlines the fact that continuously the government, through the Department of Finance, has consistently overestimated the growth figures and the growth forecasts. As a result of that, we've overestimated our ability to repay the debt incurred as a result of the bailout programme. The IMF yesterday urged that the government should impose no future austerity cuts in budgets because the growth figures here were so dismal. Now, that's underlined, I think, by the figures which you quoted this morning of 0.2% in the third quarter, which is another disappointing figure. Is it not strange that these high priests of austerity, these extraordinarily disciplined lenders, are standing back in shock at the fact that the Irish government is continuing to pursue cuts which they themselves say will be damaging to the economy? Is it not strange? Is it not even unique, Taoiseach, that the lenders in a situation like this should be less enthusiastic about the repayments and about the austerity being imposed on the Irish people than the government itself?
Thank you.
And my question to Taoiseach is this. Is he prepared to give a commitment to the House, in view of the attitude of the IMF, which is critical of the Irish government for being too austere, that in future, and in the next budget at least, he will consider not going ahead with the severe cuts which have already been predicted and been announced by this government for future years?
Thank you, Deputy. Taoiseach.
Well, the quarterly figures speak for themselves, Deputy Ross. The IMF have been largely supportive of the efforts that the Irish government are making towards an improvement both of our public finances here at home and the general improvement in our economic circumstances. Nobody ever said this was going to be easy. I note the IMF comment that they recommend no supplementary budget until 2015, if that be the case. Now, the budget for 2013 has been put through the House. Clearly, we would expect that, while that's challenging for many people, that the effort that's in there to focus on business and job opportunities and the creation of jobs through further investment will grow our economy for the third consecutive year. And I think when you consider back where we were just over 12 to 15 months ago, the situation was very serious, where the country had no standing and no reputation, was not in a position to raise any money, was in very poor state in terms of inward investment, and had an economy at home that was completely and utterly depressed. Now, the decisions made by government in changing those structures, banks, recapitalisation, rebuilding reputation, speak for themselves. Nobody wants to stand up here and say we're going to have to make further adjustments which mean cutbacks in services, because a point does come where services, you can't cut them beyond a certain point. And that's why the Croke Park Agreement has got to be implemented in full and accelerated fashion. And that's why the Minister for Public Expenditure is now negotiating with the trades unions about extra savings to be had from Croke Park. These are all in the interest of the economy. So, in the sense that Ms Lagarde has been very favourable towards Ireland, I note the comments that they make. They also make the particular point that the commitment given to this country by our European colleagues needs to be followed through. And that's an important element of both hope for our own people, that the patience that they've shown, that the challenges that they're putting up with, and the difficulties that they encounter have got to be tempered on the other side by the assistance which was committed to the country back in June 29th, when the decision was made in respect of the breach of the break between sovereign and bank debt. On the other hand, the negotiations that have been going on about the promissory notes at ECB level. So difficult to know, Deputy Ross, what will happen to the global economy. I understand the American interests are making strident efforts to deal with the fiscal cliff that they face before the end of the year. That could see an enormous improvement, obviously, in the American economy, given its efforts now in the energy field, which will speak for themselves, and also the movement and the new regime in China on the other side of the world. So from a European perspective, Ireland, a small country, serious headway made here, challenges up ahead. We do need that extra support from our European colleagues. And I can testify, Cancora, that the efforts made at the European Council meeting just last week are focused on improving the situation in European economies, where leaders now see that tough decisions are going to have to be made because we can't do this on our own. And if our partner colleagues are making headway, it's easier for us as an exporting nation to grow our own economy. So I can't give you the details of the budget for 2014, but I can say to you that we'd like to see a situation where the members of the House have an opportunity to discuss the range and the spectrum of what's involved there at an earlier date.
Deputy Ross.
Thank you, Taoiseach. The issue here, I think, is very straightforward. And I take your point about them urging Europe to take a softer line. They're saying that Europe should meet its obligations to Ireland. And they're also saying, which I hope you agree with, that Europe is failing to meet its obligations to Ireland. And implicitly they're saying that. But what they're saying as well, in that veiled criticism of Ireland, and there's obviously a split between the IMF and the rest of the Troika on this, they are saying specifically, because of the lack of growth and our failure to growth at the predicted rate, that the government here should be prepared to defer the budget cuts predicted and forecast and in the pipeline and promised for next year. And the question, if I can be specific, is this: will we be prepared to take the less austere line of the IMF, or are we going to show a greater enthusiasm for this austerity than the lenders themselves?
Thank you. Taoiseach?
Well, the single supervisory mechanism, Deputy Ross, is part of the process of making the decision following the 29th of June. That decision was endorsed last week by the heads of government at European Council level. The ECOFIN group, now the Ministers of Finance, will start the discussions on the modalities and the mechanics and the circumstances that are going to operate there. That's going to lead, obviously, to banking union. But parallel to that, the circumstances from that point of view, where Ireland finds itself in a unique position with a special case, something that will be raised at that group. The focus in this budget for 2013 has been unashamedly pro-business and pro-opportunity for small and medium enterprises to grow, because that's where the middle Ireland, if you like, Deputy Ross, that is working exceptionally hard and with demanding challenges, it's in there that the effort of government has to be seen to bring about results that will improve the lot for those who are unemployed, long-term unemployed, those who are in low incomes, and those who are in the squeezed middle sector. Because if it's left as it is, they will never have the opportunity to have greater prosperity, greater activity at jobs level and all of that. And that's where the focus of this budget has been, because our economy is going to be built on the backs of small and medium enterprises, and that's why government did not tax employment, did not increase income tax, and did not place extra taxes on work. People can plan their lives more clearly. I'd like to think, Deputy Ross, that we can continue the good progress economically during 2013 that we will get the assistance that we have been committed for from our European colleagues, making the country more attractive for investment, more attractive for job creation, where there will be greater access to credit for those small and medium enterprises, with the consequent job creation prospects there for hundreds of thousands of people who deserve them. And that's where the focus of government will be.
Thank you. That completes leaders' questions for today. We now move on to questions to the Taoiseach. Question 1.
A delegation of functions or orders are made by the government at the request of the minister concerned. At my request on the 22nd of March 2011, the government made an order delegating my statutory functions in relation to the Central Statistics Office under the Statistics Act of 1993, the Civil Service Regulation Act of 1956 to 2005, and the Public Service Management Recruitment and Appointments Act of 2004 to the Government Chief Whip, Deputy Paul Keogh.
Deputy O'Farrell.
Well, yeah, okay, I want to thank the Taoiseach, obviously, for that question. I'm particularly interested here, I suppose, in learning whether or not a delegation order has been signed, Taoiseach, in respect of the most recently appointed Junior Minister, Minister Alex White. Maybe you could let us know about that.
Yes, that was signed this morning, Deputy.
Well, that being the case, Taoiseach, it begs the question, why did it take in excess of a year to sign the delegation order in respect of the former Minister, Roisin Shortall? It seems quite extraordinary that you could act expeditiously, as you clearly have on this occasion, but that it would take in excess of a year to sign the delegation order in respect of Minister Shortall. Now, were there issues that were arising, Taoiseach, in relation to that delegation order?
Dealing with Taoiseach's questions now.
Well, I know, but the Taoiseach is the signatory of the orders, as I understand it. Is he not, Taoiseach? So what were the events, if any, Taoiseach, that precluded you from signing the order in respect of former Minister Shortall? Did you have, for example, discussions with Minister Riley or with the Taoiseach? Were there people advocating against signing the delegation order? And when the delegation order was eventually signed, why was it that the primary care area was not included in that delegation order? And in terms of your other junior ministers who have had, I take it all of your junior ministers, Taoiseach, have had their delegation orders signed at this stage. But are there any areas of responsibility described by you in their initial appointment that are not covered in the delegation order that you've signed?
Taoiseach.
It wasn't a case of reluctance to sign a delegation order, I can call it. The fact is that the primary care doesn't have a statutory legal base. So it's a difference, if you like, between statutory legal basis, policy issues and administrative issues. So the fact that it took some time to get that correct in the first place in respect of the previous Minister of State was also there in regard to her successor, Minister of State White, which meant that it was just a continuation of officially carrying on the delegation order which had been given to the previous Minister of State. So it wasn't any case of deliberately delaying here. Primary care is not a statutory power. There was a policy in the administration of dealing with primary care that was the subject of the putting together of the delegation order for the Minister of State, and that continued on to the current successor. Minister Keogh has functions with the Central Statistics Office. They include signing statutory instruments, replying to parliamentary questions on statistical matters, and receiving regular briefings on statistical matters from the staff of the Central Statistics Office. The Minister of State is also responsible for reaching agreement with the National Statistics Board on guiding the strategic direction of the Central Statistics Office. The Statistics Act of 1993 provides that the Director General of the CSO is completely independent in the exercise of functions relating to statistical methodology and standards, the content of statistical releases and publications, and the timing and the methods of dissemination of these releases and those publications. Clearly, there are specific functions delegated to the Minister for European Affairs, also accredited to the Department of the Taoiseach, the Department of Foreign Affairs. Ministers of State, as the Deputy is aware, are appointed by the Government, and their general role and responsibilities to assist ministers in the running of their various departments. In many cases, Deputy, that particular assistance is related to policy issues, and therefore formal delegation of statutory powers is not or may not be necessary, depending on the policy issues that they actually deal with.
Deputy Adams.
If I understand you properly, Taoiseach, your initial response to the question didn't name the new junior minister with responsibility for primary health care, Alex White, as someone for whom a delegation order had been signed. You then conferred with the health minister and said that this had been done this morning. Maybe I misunderstand you, but I think that's correct, isn't it?
Yes, it was approved by Cabinet this morning, Deputy Adams.
Okay. So just in the nick of time. Now you then go on to say that, and you then go on to say that in the case of a minister having responsibility for primary care, that there actually isn't a need to sign a delegation order. Well, if there was no need to sign a delegation order for the new minister, Alex White, why then did the Cabinet approve of it this morning? And if there was no need for that delegation to have been dealt with in terms of the former minister, Shorthall, who, as you know, resigned from the government when the health minister interfered in a list of primary care centres to odd locations in his own constituency after the list had been completed. So we need a wee bit of consistency, Taoiseach, and I understand that I'm only learning here, but just help me through this. There was no delegation order signed for Minister Shorthall during her entire term in office. You then say that it wasn't necessary, but yet you signed one this morning for Minister Alex White.
There's no mystery here, Deputy Adams. Previous Minister Shorthall, there was a delegation order signed in regard to her duties. Some of the duties were administrative, and they didn't require a delegation order. And some of the duties were dealing with issues that did require a delegation order. The same applies in the case of Minister of State Alex White. And the administrative end of the work that he's dealing with does not require a statutory declaration, but he also deals with opticians and dentists in the case of fluoridation and primary care, yeah. But in the case of the opticians, the dentists, fluoridation, these are areas that do require a statutory delegation order, and government approved of that this morning and signed for him. So the administrative end of primary care or the administrative areas associated with any other issue are not themselves requiring of a statutory declaration.
Question number 2.
Sanders.
Well, the primary, not in itself, because it's not a statutory function, but it does require a statutory declaration to deal with questions about opticians and dentists and fluoridation. But also the Minister of State deals with the area of primary care and the administration of that, including primary care centres.
Question number 2, the name of Deputy Micheál Martin.
I propose to take questions 2 and 3 together.
2 and 3 together.
Cabinet confidentiality is provided for in the Constitution, and I therefore have no plans for legislation in the matter, despite the fact that it was referred to in the programme for government.
Deputy O'Ferry.
Well, that's quite extraordinary. I want to thank the Taoiseach for his response, but it is quite extraordinary that you have so rapidly abandoned the commitment in the programme for government. Well, I suppose it's just one of many other commitments that have already been abandoned, and many of the election promises, Taoiseach, that have been treated with total abandon as well. But your department's strategy statement said, we will legislate on the issue of cabinet confidentiality. Now, we've seen in the course of the preparation for the most recent budgets that we have the Economic Management Council functioning as a de facto cabinet. We used to have kitchen cabinets, now we have an Economic Management Council. It would appear that the reason that that approach was adopted was to ensure the minimisation of leaks from government, which were happening every hour of every day in the run-up to last year's estimate or budget announcement. This year you did manage to keep things quite tight until you went to Cabinet with your set of proposals. And then we found ourselves with a budget that had very few surprises in it, with the exception perhaps of the misery that you were intent on inflicting on carers. Now, can you explain to us what it is that has motivated you, Taoiseach, to abandon the promise that you included in the programme for government, that you included in your department's strategy statement? And can you tell us, given the importance of cabinet confidentiality, you were going to do a report card for your ministers, their minister, or Taoiseach, at one stage. Have you been checking their performance on their report card in terms of those who have been maintaining confidentiality and those who have been leaking on an ongoing basis? And what is it that you, as Taoiseach, well, I assume you're firmly committed yourself to cabinet confidentiality, what is it that you are doing on an ongoing basis to address the regular leaks from Cabinet? And what type of action could the public expect you, as Taoiseach, to take in a situation where you can identify a member of Cabinet who has been responsible for a significant leak? I know in the past your party and government had to take the fairly extraordinary step of removing a junior minister who leaked the entire budget in the one go. Maybe his only mistake was that that's what he did. He gave it all out at once, whereas in recent times we've been getting it all in dribs and drabs.
Taoiseach.
Well, you will recall the Howland judgment many years ago, where the confidentiality of correspondence received by members of the House here was challenged. That actually will be dealt with in the whistleblowers legislation in 2013. I might say to you that I've read some of the material that purports to be from the Cabinet, and I might quote, is it Mark Twain who said, you know, rumours are greatly exaggerated here. I've read of things like vicious rows, walkouts, this, that and the other. Let me assure you, Deputy, the government is completely focused on its work in terms of the country, our national challenges, our people, getting our economy right. And as you're aware, confidentiality is something that all ministers sign up to in terms of the Official Secrets Act, and therefore in that context legislation is not necessary. And I remind ministers on a regular basis of the importance of keeping that confidentiality. I have no control over rumours or speculation or indeed allegations. And if you go back as far as 1922 and look at any of the reports of all the governments, the same old story applies. Those outside the Cabinet like to write about what they think goes on in there. There have been occasions, of course, in the past where some of these things happen to be true. But let me assure you, Deputy, that in respect of recent headlines that I've read, they're very, very far wide of the mark.
Deputy Adams, I'll come back to you. Deputy Adams. Question 3.
Taoiseach, because that, all those rumours and leaks and innuendo and so all imply that Labour in some way stood up to your government, and I don't see any evidence of that whatsoever. But you're pirouetting over the poor, Brendan. That's what you're at. But the programme for government does contain, Taoiseach, a commitment to legislate on the issue of cabinet confidentiality. And you've said you're not going to now act on that. And it also commits to opening up the budget process to the full glare of public scrutiny in a way that restores confidence. And you also say in your programme for government that the government is too centralised and that it's too unaccountable, and you want a real shift in power from the state to the citizens. Now, has all that been torn up? You know, the Economic Management Council put together the budget, 4 men, put together an anti-woman, anti-family, anti-children budget, and there's less scrutiny of all of these decisions here in this chamber where it's supposed to be debated, in my knowledge, than with other governments. We only hear about this through the media, accurately or otherwise, or from the Bundestag. We don't hear it in here. We don't hear it the way it should be. And there isn't any proper scrutiny because we're not given the information which would allow us to do the job we were sent here to do. So just let me be clear about this. You're saying that you're not moving in these programme for government commitments to legislate on the issue of cabinet confidentiality. Are you going to move on the commitment to shift power from the state to the citizens? Are you going to move on the commitment to open the Dail up and make it more open to public scrutiny? And if so, when? And what status has any pending legislation? And what steps do you intend, particularly around the budget? You know, today is another day we'll just rush this through. How do you intend to open up the budget process to public scrutiny, and particularly to scrutiny here in this Parliament?
Thank you.
Deputy, you're aware that Article 28(4)(3) of the Constitution, Bunrath Nahéireann, says the confidentiality of discussions or meetings of the government shall be respected in all circumstances, save only where the High Court determines that disclosure should be made in respect of a particular matter. And that's in the interest of the administration of justice by a court or by virtue of an overriding public interest pursuant to an application in that behalf by a tribunal appointed by the government or by a minister of the government on the authority of the Houses of the Oireachtas to inquire into a matter stated by them to be of public importance. In that sense, confidentiality is paramount in the Constitution and should never be abused by members of any cabinet. Now, you mentioned about information being made available by the Bundestag. I admit that there was an indiscreet leak from the European Commission in respect of a requirement, Deputy Adams, that when the sort of general proposals for the budget are put together, that they must be presented to lender countries. That's a requirement of the funding mechanism. We have now changed the situation to the fact that when that's actually presented, it's also laid in the library of the Dáil at the same time, so that there isn't any confusion about that. I'd also say to you that the presentation of the budget will be earlier next year. Ministers would hope that to be about November. But I would say to you that we have published the review of expenditure. We've set out the expenditure limits and ceilings for each of the next 3 years. We've asked every department and every minister to examine those and present their views. We've restored the freedom of information. The whistleblowers legislation is in train here. The Register of Lobbyists legislation is also being prepared, and we've expanded the role of the Ombudsman. So, in a short time, given the extent of legislation required to go through, a great deal has been done here. And given all of that, and all of the information that was made available to your good self and all your elected colleagues, it was strange indeed that you didn't show any seriousness about making really tough choices. You didn't submit your own proposals for the budget for independent costing and analysis by the independent unit of the Department of Finance. So the situation was that all of the information was out there for you, is out there for you, and that will increase in evidence during 2013. And we hope to have an earlier process for dealing with the budget also, Deputy Adams. So have your people prepared.
Just go back, I'll come back to you. Deputy O'Fleury.
Okay, well, can you tell us, Taoiseach, and is it possible to give a direct answer to this? Did you have advice in terms of the proposed legislation that you spoke of and cabinet confidentiality? Did you have advice on that matter from the Attorney General? The situation would appear to be, Count Corley, in light of the very many commitments made by government about reform of politics, it would appear that we're now seeing what the actual reform is. It involves at cabinet level a small cohort of 4 people making the principal decisions and bringing those decisions at the last minute to the full cabinet. And we've heard complaints from people like Minister Coveney about that particular matter. And I think we could suspect that some of the decisions made about not proceeding with the additional 3% universal social charge on people earning over 100,000 as something that might not have been abandoned if the entirety of the cabinet had been involved, and we might not have seen in that situation carers being abandoned and treated in the way that they are. And we see here in the House the new politics is to guillotine critical pieces of legislation, such as the Social Welfare Bill, which I presume is going to be guillotined in the Seanad this afternoon. And we see the quite appalling procedure that's being adopted in terms of the property tax proposal. We know that this won't come into play until July. There is plenty of time to have a detailed discussion. At least there should be time to give a fair allocation of time to the 88 amendments that are down to this important piece of legislation. A piece of legislation which, when enacted, will place an intolerable burden on the shoulders of many people in this country that are not able to carry the burdens they're currently struggling with. So would you accept, Taoiseach, that we are in fact now seeing the reforms, real reforms, but they're not the reforms that the people thought they were going to be. They're not the positive initiatives that the public, when they placed their faith in you in very substantial numbers in early 2011, the people have not got what they thought they were going to get and what they had a right to get.
Well, first of all, the Economic Management Council is a very useful method of actually dealing with a whole range of issues and proposals before they're actually sent to government for final decision by the cabinet. Every member of the government accepts the decision of cabinet in respect of the budget, and it's for very good reason. In order, as much as to save time as anything else, that it's been streamlined in this fashion. Ministers, for instance, in respect of the Department of Finance and the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform, Minister Howland had to have bilaterals with every minister in respect of the ceilings for their departments and how they intended to meet their individual targets, and obviously Minister for Finance setting out tax proposals on the other end. So, for instance, the PAC report also said in respect of its views on banking that the committee recognises that the constitutional principle of cabinet confidentiality must be respected, and I believe in that obviously as well. Now, you mentioned about the Social Protection Bill and others, for instance. Just 2 years ago, if you recall, you were here, the government, the Fianna Fáil-led government, actually took 8% of a whole swathe of social protection recipients, but didn't even let the deputies go home to engage with their constituents. They did it before the Dail broke up at all. So it's not true to say that
fair and progressive.
Well, 8% cut across the board on everybody, and you cut the blind pension twice just a couple of years ago. So we don't want to go back there. We're heading into 2013, and I hope, Deputy, that the process for the budget for next year will be even more open than now. And as I said to Deputy Adams, the review plans are published, the expenditure review plans are published. The ceilings for the next 3 years for each department are out there. We've asked every spokesman and everybody with responsibility to look at those, including line ministers. And we'll hope to have a vigorous, open and comprehensive series of discussions during 2013 on the budget for 2014.
Deputy Adams.
The reason why, Taoiseach, I'm asking these questions is because my initial question asked your plans to introduce legislation to deal with the issue of cabinet confidentiality. And the reason why I asked that question is because your programme for government contains that commitment. So, Cara Harlalesh, what happened to that commitment? If it isn't, as you said, appropriate, and you read at length there from the Constitution, well then why was it in the programme for government in the first instance? Secondly, for the record, all Sinn Féin proposals for an alternative budget were sent to the Department of Finance, and they costed all of them. The only one they didn't cost was for the wealth tax. They refused to cost the wealth tax. Now, the wealth tax was offered up by us as an alternative to the family home tax, which you're rushing through this chamber. The big thing that I have been unable to get an answer to, and I don't think you can dodge behind the issue of cabinet confidentiality on this one, because obviously you considered the care respite grant and taking that away, you considered child benefit and taking that away or cutting it, you considered putting tax on maternity allowance and so on and so on and so on. Was the budget equality proofed? Was it? You're bound to know. Was it equality proof? When the four just men sat in their little cabinet or sub-cabinet meeting and took all of these decisions, and it was brought into the cabinet, did some of the cabinet ministers not say, oh, by the way, lads, have you equality proofed this? So somebody's bound to know. Was the budget equality proofed? Were these scathing cuts which affect the most vulnerable people, you know the whole litany of people out there who are burdened by what your government is doing. Were they part of the deliberations, and was the budget equality proofed?
Taoiseach.
You haven't defined what you mean by equality proofed. Insofar as the consideration of the government was concerned, all of the issues in the budget were considered in the sense of being balanced, given the circumstances in which the country finds itself, and we acknowledge the challenge that many people face here. So I'm not going to legislate for cabinet confidentiality. I've looked at this. It's clearly in the Constitution. I've referred to the Howland judgment, which the consequences of which will be contained in the whistleblowers legislation about the confidentiality of material transmitted to members of the House here, and that will be contained in the whistleblowers legislation, which is underway. The Attorney General was not consulted here. So in that sense, Deputy, if I recall from comments made by some of your own deputies here, I think your costing was done by submission of parliamentary questions as distinct from a formal set of proposals to be costed one after the other by the section of the Department of Finance. Well, look, the situation here for years has been that opposition parties put together their alternative budget and they send it in its entirety to the section of the Department of Finance which assesses those. We did this ourselves for years, so did the Labour Party. But you chose to ask a series of parliamentary questions and then make wild and fanciful comments about everything would be absolutely rosy in the garden under Sinn Féin, that nobody would pay anything. Some mythical myriad of millionaires would be trumping up everything under the Sinn Féin propositions. But the point is, Deputy Adams, that you actually never sat down to face the difficult choices that are the reality of what government decisions have to deal with. And nobody likes to stand up and say, I'm sorry, we have to reduce this or take away something. We've got to deal with the problem of our national finances, and we've tried to do that in as fair and as balanced a way as we can, Deputy.
Thank you. Question number 4 in the name of Deputy Micheál Martin.
I propose to take 4 to 7 together, Cancrola.
4 to 7 together.
All Cabinet Committees, including the Economic Management Council, which is the status of a Cabinet Committee, have met this year, and a total of 91 meetings have been held. My department provides all necessary secretariat support for the Cabinet Committee on Mortgage Arrears. The Cabinet Committee on Children's Rights referendum met on 2 occasions, on the 21st and 23rd of August, and its work is now concluded.
Deputy O'Flaherty.
Well, could I maybe refer firstly to the question of the Children's Rights referendum committee, Taoiseach, because there are a few questions, I suppose, that need to be addressed. It's quite sad, I think, in a way, that in the aftermath of the very significant High Court ruling on the information leaflets that the government circulated in the course of the campaign, that we only had an opportunity earlier today when my colleague Deputy Robert Troy had an engagement with Minister Fitzgerald on this particular matter, but it's something that the public have been concerned about. So can you maybe give us a little bit of information on the workings, the meetings of the Committee on the Children's Rights referendum? Can you tell us, did that committee approve the wording of the material that appeared in the website and that was circulated in the leaflets that were distributed across the country? Are you satisfied, with the benefit now, Taoiseach, of hindsight, that the very strong similarity between the party political leaflets that your own party and the Labour Party produced was reflected in the material that was produced by government, something that is in itself clearly contrary to the terms of the McKenna judgment? Or would you accept that maybe because of the fact that all parties in this House were in support of this particular amendment, that perhaps your government was a little bit complacent in its approach to the referendum? It's a point I made when I had the opportunity to speak here on the referendum bill, that it was incumbent on all of us to go out and be enthusiastic and be positive and explain the merits of this proposed referendum to the public. I think we all have to express disappointment that while it was won, and we welcome that the level of participation was far less than I think most of us, and I'm sure yourself included, Taoiseach, would have liked to see. But can you go back and tell us about the workings of this referendum committee? And can you finally give us some information in relation to the role of the Attorney-General in relation to the wording that was used? Some people, leaks from government, were about the place in the aftermath of the ruling, seeking, it would appear, to lay the blame for the difficulties that the government finds itself in at the door of the Attorney-General. So would you care maybe to exonerate the Attorney-General from any involvement in this whole process, or can you tell us, in fact, whether she saw the wording at all or not?
Taoiseach.
Well, the first thing I want to say to you, Deputy O'Farrell, is that I am constrained now in what I can say, because there is a High Court challenge to the Referendum Act of 1994, and therefore I don't want to say anything in the House here that would in any way prejudice that challenge before the High Court. I just want to say this to you. The referendum took place against a background of where for 20 years it had never reached the point of the question being asked of the people. I think that was a significant development by the Minister for Children, working with the Attorney-General and the government to actually bring it to a point where the people were asked that question. And as the Deputy O'Farrell is aware, we've now had 4 referenda in 18 months. Constitutional Convention has been set up. I accept completely and I respect the decision of the Supreme Court in this matter, and the government will reflect on the issues raised by the Supreme Court in their judgment. Clearly that's the ultimate legal arbiter in terms of our Constitution and the way our legislation is to be interpreted. But Deputy O'Farrell, to be honest with you, as there is a High Court challenge here for the 94 Act, I don't want to say anything in regard to the referendum that might in any way be deemed to be or perceived to be prejudicial to the case that is before the High Court. I'd be happy to talk about it afterwards.
Deputy Adams.
But, Concordia, my question is about the Government Subcommittee on Mortgage Relief. But before I come to that, if I may, it's clear that the budget wasn't equality-proof. And there is a practice in the North, which is part of the statutory obligation, I think it's Section 75, which makes it necessary for departments to equality-proof any decisions that they're taking. And I would commend that to you. That would mean that you would have looked at the carers' respite allowance cuts or the children's benefit cuts or all the rest of it and get an assessment of how that would affect the social and other consequences for the person, the citizen who's involved. But coming to this, the Cabinet Subcommittee on Mortgage Distress, how often has it met? How many ministers are on it? Will this Committee on Mortgage Arrears engage with the banks directly, or will that be done by the Economic Management Council? And it's shocking. I think it was last week. The figures from the central bank said that almost 180,000 mortgage holders are in distress, and that every single day 115 homeowners fall into distress. And I also understand that many of these people are going to be liable for this new family home tax that you're bringing in. And of all of this, I know this is Fianna Fáil's baby. They come forward with it, and you can't keep blaming them on that. But the Keane report recommendations haven't been implemented. There were reports from banking sources saying that they're preparing for a crackdown on distressed buy-to-let mortgage holders in the new year. So have the banks, or has the government been lobbied by the banks, or even if they haven't lobbied you, have you any intention to bring in legislation? And will you put in place safeguards to prevent repossession of the family home?
Well, the Cabinet Committee on Mortgage Arrears, Deputy Adams, met on 8 times during the last number of months. As you're aware, the Cabinet Committee on Mortgage Arrears was established last March, and its remit was to oversee the implementation, sort of on a cross-departmental basis, of the government's response to the issue of mortgage arrears, to agree a detailed implementation plan for the recommendations of the interdepartmental report on mortgage arrears, to ensure that appropriate prioritisation of the delivery of this plan was put in place across all the relevant departments, and to develop any further issues in regard to mortgage arrears that were required arising from those from that publication. The government, if you like, focused on 4 areas: resolution strategies by the banks, the new personal insolvency framework. As you're aware, the bill was published in June of last year, completed final stage in the Shannon last week, and is back in the Dail here for final report stage this week. It will be completed by the end of the year, and will create a modern and a fairer approach to dealing with unsustainable debt. Work is also underway, Deputy Adams, in parallel on the establishment of the Insolvency Service of Ireland, to ensure that that's ready to provide the new service following the enactment of the legislation. The director of that service is already in place, along with a number of staff to oversee the establishment of the service early in 2013. Now, you quite rightly raised the question of repossession of homes. Deputy Adams is well aware that when banks lend money to borrowers for the purchase of houses or whatever, that there are conditions attached to those lendings in the first place, which mean that if the borrower is not in a position to pay, the right of acquisition or repossession of the house applies. In this country, the number of repossessions has been very small, and we want to keep it that way. The issue that was raised by the Dunn case was a particular issue that we didn't want to present until the insolvency service is actually in place here, and that was a loophole in the legislation identified there in regard to certain circumstances for some loans and that matter is one that required clarification by the memorandum of understanding with the Troika, and that'll be done afterwards. But it doesn't mean, as some people were saying, that there would be a rash of house repossessions. Everybody in this country, Cancora, as you know better than most, have pride in their homes, and ownership of a home in this country is of exceptional importance here. So, protecting the home of the most distressed mortgage holders through a mortgage to rent scheme. That's where the ownership of the house passes on to the approved housing body, subject to eligibility criteria. There is also the whole question of comprehensive guidance and advice. I have to say that I noted the AIB said there recently that they now hope to be in a position to deal with 2,000 mortgages a month that are either in arrears or in distress, or where there is a particular problem. And I'm quite sure that for many households, even in the past short period now, the best news that they can get is that there's been a solution here worked out that doesn't require the repossession of the home. And we hope that that can continue, and that as prosperity would increase and the economy grow, that many people who own houses, who are unemployed and single or couples or whatever, can have the opportunity to be able to get employment, to get work, and therefore be able to meet the mortgage repayments that have been set out there. In regard to the central bank, Deputy Adams, the situation is that the regulator of credit institutions, which is the central bank, asked all mortgage lenders to prepare and to submit to it mortgage arrears resolution strategies and implementation plans. Mr. Elderfield explained this when we met with him on a number of occasions, and following the submission of those plans, the bank commenced an in-depth engagement process with all of those lenders to see how valid they were, the sectors that they were divided off on, the various areas of the country that these referred to. And the reason for that, Cancora, was to ensure that every lender had a really effective strategy in place to deal with all mortgage holders who were experiencing difficulties. And arising from this, banks had to refine their proposals because the regulator wasn't happy with them, and they committed to the central bank to build on the existing, what they call, forbearance solutions, to extend the range of alternative solutions to deal with genuinely distressed mortgage holders. So the main lenders have now completed the segmentation of their loan books, and they've submitted to the central bank the options that they propose to implement dealing with distressed mortgages, and they include split mortgages and trade-down mortgages, restructuring of mortgage payments, and forbearance. So I hope that in the dealing with persons who have distressed mortgages or who are in difficulties here, that the solutions required by the central bank to the lenders, that the banks themselves have committed themselves to, the introduction of the personal insolvency agency and the Insolvency Service of Ireland, will provide an alternative to the banks that's open to anybody to avail of if they so wish. And as I say, Deputy Adams, that bill will hopefully be gone through this week and be in operation early in spring. So I hope that's one element of dealing with complex and sensitive issues here, and the other is to drive the economy to a point where people who are unemployed, who are on low incomes, where jobs might have been lost or whatever, will be able to get back into the world of employment, be able to contribute and meet their requirements under their mortgage conditions. And of course, in some cases, as has been pointed out, banks have to look at the question of some element of write-down in particular circumstances. But I hope that the level of repossessions would be very small indeed.
Deputy O'Farrell.
Okay, I want to thank the Taoiseach for his response, and I suppose at the outset to acknowledge the absolute enormity of the challenge that faces the government in this particular area. I welcome your commitment to the having the personal insolvency agency up and running, and I take it that you're saying to us, Taoiseach, that will be happening in the first quarter of 2013. Now, you've made reference to the fact that the government have come through with a number of initiatives. They've had a minor impact, I think you'd have to accept. The rent-to-buy initiative, one person, I think, the last time I read something on this being involved. I know the voluntary housing sector is working in particular, I think, with the AIB Bank to try and do something about people in arrears, but the numbers of people that are benefiting are infinitesimally small relative to the growing number of people in distress.